I moved into the neighborhood last spring. It was quiet, suburban, exactly the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved to each other from their driveways. The only house that stood out was the one next to mine. It was an old, pale yellow house with peeling paint and an unkempt lawn. The curtains were always drawn, and the front porch had an overwhelming smell of mildew, like something rotting just beneath the surface. It belonged to a man named Edgar Mallory. I first met Edgar on my third day in the neighborhood. I was taking out the trash when I felt someone watching me. I turned, and there he was, standing motionless on his porch. He was tall, painfully thin, with hollowed-out cheeks and sunken eyes. His skin looked stretched too tight for his bones. He wore an old, ragged bathrobe, and his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "You just moved in," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Yeah, right next door." He just stared at me, unblinking. Then he said something that sent a chill through me. "Have you heard them yet?" I frowned. Heard what? His lips parted slightly, as if he was about to say something, but instead, he just turned and went back inside, shutting the door behind him. That night, I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind, a soft, scraping sound like fingernails dragging across wood, then a rhythmic tapping. It was coming from Edgar's house. I got up and looked out my bedroom window, which faced his. His lights were off, but something in the darkness moved. A shadow, tall, shifting, swaying. Then a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it was desperate, like pleading. The next morning, I saw Edgar in his front yard, digging a hole. A deep, jagged hole, like he was looking for something, or burying it. I watched from my window as he whispered to himself, his fingers caked in dirt, his breath ragged. When he finished, he stood there for a long time, staring down at the hole, like he was waiting for it to move. Then slowly, he filled it back in. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But over the next few weeks, it got worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of him talking to himself. No, not to himself, to someone who wasn't there. I started locking my doors, keeping my curtains shut, but one night around 2 a.m., my doorbell rang. My heart pounded. I checked the peephole. It was Edgar. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth. His face was slick with sweat. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're coming. They come when I sweep." I froze. Then he did something that still makes my skin crawl. He reached out, not toward the door, but toward the peephole, toward me, as if he knew I was there. His fingers twitched, hovering inches away from the wood, as if he could feel my presence. Then he turned and walked away. The next morning, I decided to call someone. Maybe his family, if he had any. Maybe social services, but before I could, I saw something that made my blood run cold. His front door was wide open. I hesitated before stepping onto his porch. The inside of his house smelled of sweat and something worse, something sour and decayed. The walls were covered in scratches, long, deep gouges like claw marks. Scattered across the floor were pieces of paper, each one filled with frantic, looping handwriting. They said, like, they watch when I close my eyes. The dirt doesn't keep them down. They whisper in the walls. Don't let them in. I stepped deeper inside. His bedroom door was ajar. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs. Pictures of holes in the ground, holes in his backyard, holes in the woods. And in each one, something was inside. Something buried, but not completely. A hand, a face, wide, staring eyes peering through the dirt. Then I saw his bed. He was in it, but he wasn't moving. His eyes were open, unblinking, his mouth stretched into a frozen scream. His hands clutched at his chest, as if he had been trying to claw something out from under his own skin. And on the wall above him, scratched into the wood, was one final message. I dug too deep. They found me. I ran. I called the police. They took him away, ruled it a breakdown, a tragic case of untreated psychosis. But I know the truth, because at night, when the wind is still, I hear it. The soft, rhythmic scraping coming from his empty house.
When I moved into my new apartment, I thought I'd found the perfect place. It was an old 3-story house that had been converted into apartments, one on each floor. The rent was cheap, the location was decent, and aside from the occasional creaks of an aging building, it was quiet. I lived on the 2nd floor. A quiet woman named Miss Tilly lived below me, and upstairs in what used to be the attic lived Miss Corbin. I never saw Miss Corbin, not once. I only ever heard her. It started small. At night, I'd hear soft movements, shuffling footsteps, a chair scraping against the floor. But as the weeks went by, the noises got stranger. One night, I woke up to the sound of something skittering across the ceiling. Not footsteps, something faster. I told myself it must just be mice, maybe squirrels in the attic. But then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Breathing. Long, wheezing breaths directly above me, slow and deliberate, like someone was crouched right over my bed. I didn't sleep much after that. I asked Miss Tilly if she ever heard anything. She just shook her head. I don't want to talk about her. That was all she said. A week later, I ran into the landlord while checking my mail. I asked about Miss Corbin. The landlord sighed. She's been here for years. She doesn't talk to people, pays rent in cash, that's all I know. That night, I locked my bedroom door. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a soft thump, then another. It was coming from above. Then a slow creaking sound, like a door opening. I held my breath. Then footsteps, not just moving around her space, moving towards the stairs. A creeping, deliberate descent. I shot up in bed, heart hammering, listening as the footsteps made their way to the hallway outside my apartment. Then they stopped, right outside my door. I sat frozen, gripping my sheets. Then, a slow, rhythmic knocking. I didn't move. Then, a whisper. Are you awake? I nearly screamed. I grabbed my phone and texted Miss Tilly. She's at my door. No response. Then the doorknob turned. I bolted out of bed, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, my lamp, and held my breath. The doorknob stopped. Silence. Then soft, retreating footsteps. I waited until sunrise before I dared open my door. The hallway was empty, but something was different. The attic door at the top of the stairs, it was wide open. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I knocked on Miss Tilly's door. She answered after several minutes, her face pale. "Did you hear that last night?" I asked. She swallowed hard. She does that sometimes. I stared at her. Why does she do that? She hesitated. Then she said, "I don't think she lives up there alone." A sick chill crawled through me. "What do you mean?" She looked at the floor. "I hear her talking sometimes, not like on the phone, like whispering, like she's answering someone, but no one ever goes up there." I felt nauseous. That night, I stayed awake, listening. At around 2:30 a.m., I heard it. Miss Corbin's low whispers. A conversation, but only one voice. Then, a different noise. A shuffle, a thump, something dragging, then a child's laugh. I couldn't move. I just sat in my bed, staring at the ceiling. Then right above me, a soft knock on the floor. 3 knocks. Then silence. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. A few days later, I was watching the news and there was Miss Corbin. Miss Corbin had been arrested, not for anything recent. They found something in the attic. Old remains, buried beneath the floorboards. A man and a child. The cops say they've been there for years. But every night, I heard them.